Hi everyone, welcome to our knowledge sharing sessions. As you may already know, we are organizing knowledge sharing sessions for the purpose to create a knowledge database. In this knowledge sharing session, we'll get to look at the mechanics of app development with Webiny. We'll get to know the structure of the app, how it is bundled, and how to make reusable app templates. Without further ado, I will invite our CTO Pavel to continue his session for today. Pavel?
Thank you, Albiona. Hey, everyone. Welcome to our new session. Let's jump straight in. So I prepared a couple of slides just to kind of introduce and talk over what we're going to do with the code today. So app development with Webiny. So let's just quickly go through what and how apps are structured in Webiny. So there's no magic with Webiny. When you create your new project, it may seem like there is something hidden from you, but actually apps in Webiny are just regular React apps. They're no different from your regular apps that you create with the Create React app, but they do provide a little bit more freedom with bundling and configuration of your bundling, and we'll look at that later on. So it's easy to customize your bundling with Webiny, unlike Create React app, where you have to eject and you get a dozen of config files to work with, which nobody likes, but many people have to do the moment they get into a more complex application and need to configure more stuff, more tweaks, add more plugins. They just have to eject, which is not ideal, but that's how things are with Create React app. So with Webiny, it's much easier to configure your bundling process or replace your bundling logic entirely if you really need to. You could also use other bundling tools. Like by default at Webiny, we use Webpack, and our bundling process is very similar to Create React app. It's actually derived from Create React app bundling. You could use Parcel if you're good with that and you like how that works. You could easily do that as well. So Another cool thing about Webiny apps is that they are ready for server-side rendering, because we provide utilities for server-side rendering out of the box. And that's a quite large topic. We won't be covering that in this session. That's what comes next week. And we'll have a dedicated session on server-side rendering. So React apps are great. We have components, you mount them, you get your app running. But what's even better is when you can reuse your entire apps. So we had quite a lot of experiments here at Webiny to tackle this problem, how you can make an app reusable and at the same time pluginable, so other people can take your app off NPM and even publish their own apps so community can use them. And we came up with this concept of app templates. So an app template is actually a simple component factory. It's a way to build your apps in a way that allows you to share them easily as an NPM package. So basically, we kind of pack an entire app into an NPM package, which is reusable and composable. The reason why we wanted to do that is to avoid starting from scratch every time you begin creating your React app. Imagine you're a web agency and you have 20 clients each month. Most of them will likely have a very similar site, or especially an administration app, which is like every admin app is similar. And if you have your own brand you're trying to pass on to your clients, it's easy to just build your base admin app and reuse it using app templates. We'll see how that's done in a couple of minutes. And the last thing that is really important is that you can use your base app templates and customize them via plugins. So this is a way to share apps and not components, because by sharing components, you still need to add them to your app, mount them, install a bunch of dependencies. With app templates, you install one package, one NPM package as a dependency, and you get an entire app out of it, which is also customizable via plugins. So there is a couple of articles in our documentation at this here link The series is still a work in progress, but already you can see a lot of things that we're going to touch on in this knowledge sharing session. They're explaining details in at this here link. Now let's jump into the code and see how all of this ties together. Okay. Off you go. All right, so what you see here is a project which is created using Create Webiny project tool. It's what you get when you complete our Getting Started document in our documentation. And the only thing I did is I deployed an API, which is also a part of Getting Started document. So once you have that, you can follow along this video. So let's take a look at how apps work. So by default, when you set up Webiny, you get an admin app, you get your site app, and I already created a simple basic app structure here, so we don't waste time on creating files. And so I'll just guide you through the contents of your new app. It looks very similar to Create React app. It has a public folder, it has an index.html file. The contents of HTML file is basically the same as with Create React app, so there is not a lot to discuss here. Just close that. And then you have a source folder with all your code. Not much at this point, just one index file, and a very, very simple React app. It just says welcome. Besides that, we have an environment JSON file with your regular environment variables, public URL, port, regular stuff, nothing Webiny specific. tsconfig to extend a tsconfig file from the root of your project. There's just regular stuff. You get everything you need by extending that. So we don't need to dive into details there. And we have a package.json. Very simple file, 2 dependencies at this point. And right away, you can see we are using envcmd package to load environment variables using JSON files. That's how we prefer to do it. If you like .env or similar tools, you're free to use those. Really nothing stopping you from doing that. We prefer to use this tool because it allows us to nicely organize variables using like environment variable blocks. You could easily define like a new block of environment variables and override the one. Let's say you want a new variable, you can override it here and load specific blocks. So it's just a neat tool when you want to organize variables for different environments. We'll get to that later on. Just something I wanted to mention because not everybody is using this particular tool to load variables. Okay, so besides that, you will see one file that is not found in Create React app. It's webiny.config.js. This one is Webiny specific. So far, it doesn't contain much. And just to demonstrate and talk you through how Webiny runs your bundling, I'll run regular yarn start and see what you get. So you don't get much. It just tells you that you can bundle your app in any way you like. How cool is that? Okay, so what just happened? I'll split the screen with these 2 files so you can see it better. All right, so when we start the script, we run yarn start, right? It uses this envcmd to load environment variables. That's no big deal there. And then what happens is the command webiny run start is executed. So webiny is our CLI, and it exposes a run command. What that command does is it looks for webiny config.js in your current working directory. And it loads that file, looks for commands, and tries to execute the command that you have specified in your script. So in our case, it's start, so it looks for this start command here. You can name this however you like. It will just try to match it and execute. This way, we have a very flexible bundling. Actually, it doesn't even have to be bundling only. You can do anything you like with this approach. We just call it commands because that's what they are. You just run a command, it executes your function, and you do whatever you want in here. Now let's take a look at what are these options and context. These are pretty standard. So whatever commands you may define in this file, you will always have options and a context. I'll just do a quick console log of these two and run the script again. And you'll see that you get this weird object. So these are options. And this is actually the parsed yargs command. We are using yargs for our CLI, and it's a neat little tool to build command line tools. This way you have access to all the parameters that were passed to your script. So you can easily add custom parameter, and it will be directly translated into your command. As you can see, now we have custom parameter. This will play a pretty big role later on when we upgrade our app to do something meaningful. At this point, I just want you to know that this is how you can pass your custom options into your commands and actually work with them. So the second parameter is context. Now, context is something that comes from our CLI itself, and it gives you access to the plugins container, which is pretty cool because you can register plugins in your Webiny root.js. This is where these plugins come from. And you can add your own plugins in here, and they will be available to you during your bundling processes. So again, it's not only bundling, but the majority of time you use it for bundling. That's why I'm saying that you have like a bundling process, but it can be any command you want. It can even query a weather API if you want to. So the purpose of commands is not important. The important thing is that you have access to parameters and you have access to the whole Webiny CLI context, which gives you the root of your project path, which is also quite important. It gives you access to plugins container, which you can then use to register and use whatever plugins you want. So now that we have these two things out of the way, I'll show you how we can actually bundle our app. So I have a code snippets ready on my other monitor, so I don't type any typos. I'll just copy and paste this stuff over. So what I just did, I copied over a require statement which uses our project utils package. Now this package contains a lot of utilities for your project, thus the project utils name. And it contains a tool which will start a local Webpack dev server and bundle your app the same way Create React App would. So let's execute that and see what we get. So the signature of those helper functions is the same as the command itself. That's how we do it for convenience. You can even just use if it's the only thing you run in this function, you can literally just do start and then do start app. Sorry, like that, and it will work as well because the signature is the same. I'll do it the longer version because we will add some stuff on top of this. Okay, let's run the build again. So yarn start. I will remove this parameter. We're not going to use it just to keep it clear. Okay, now we are getting something. So he's complaining because we don't have the browser list. We'll just let it generate it for us. And bam, we have our app bundled the same way you usually do when you run your React scripts. And, the process is derived from React scripts, so it will look identical and all the same rules apply. So if you have experience using Create React App, you basically already know everything that you need to know to work with Webiny apps. So I will split the screen and bring in our app. There we go. We got our app. Welcome. Not much to see here, but we'll upgrade that in a second. So this is how you bundle. If you want to customize anything, customize your Webpack or bubble, you can do that using these options. There are lots of, so let's just spread the options in case there are any past. Then you can have stuff like Webpack. And you get our base config in here. Just return it. Let's auto format this a little bit, shall we? No? Oh, sorry. Yeah, for some reason it's not formatting my code. Very nice. Let's do it like that, manually. Yeah. So this is return. I don't know why prettier is not kicking in. It's pretty weird. Yeah, it's here. Oh, give me a second. Let me just take a look at prettier. I don't know why it's not working. Oh, okay. Kind of makes sense. Not much, but okay. Shall we? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So what you can do with this is customize your default Webpack config, which you can't do with Create React App. You have to either use tools like rescripts or eject and override it manually. So this is a neat way to add modifications. And the same way you can customize your bubble. So if you have your bubble config, you need to add new plugins or anything, you can just do it the same way. So I just showed this to you so you know what how to approach customization of your bundling. Now, let's say you want a completely custom process. Maybe you want to use parcel or something like that. You just wouldn't use our utility, which we provide, and you would write your own bundling function, and maybe even use Execa or something to spawn a child process to do that for you. So this way of executing commands give you as a developer a lot of freedom and flexibility. You can communicate with third-party APIs in here. Imagine this being run in a CI environment. Maybe you would communicate with some API to fetch your environment variable values or something similar. So with this approach, you completely control how your bundling is executed. We just provide you with sensible defaults which work for us, and they will most likely work for you if you're not doing anything super custom. Okay, so with this, I think we covered how you run a build process and how it's executed. Now let's see what an app template is, how it works. And to start off, we will first use an app template which we use to run our administration app for Webiny, which contains all of the apps, like the page builder, headless, form builder, everything. I will again copy the code and just talk you through. And then we will, once we see what we get by using app templates, we will actually create our own, and you will get to understand every line of code. So this is just a demonstration. So first of all, as you can see, app templates are used as regular packages. You just import your template and you use it as a factory to create a component. The cool thing about templates is that, especially if you write them using TypeScript, you get nice autocomplete. You know which options a template can accept. So right here, but let's say I remove this cognito thing, you will notice that this template actually requires us to use a cognito. So I'll just restore what I removed, and you know exactly which variables are expected from you. So this is a very cool way of providing community with your own app template. You don't need to type tons of documentation. If you do it with TypeScript, you just get autocomplete. Okay, well, we need also to provide some styles. Let's create map as CSS file. Okay, so the way we do it is we always provide styles file with our templates. So this is one of the Webiny app templates, and you just import styles from it inside of your CSS file. Now we can import it, that's okay. And now the last thing to do is to provide these environment variables. Since we don't have them hard-coded anywhere, again, we will use Webiny config command and load those variables from our API state. Now, this is something new, so we'll just take a step back and talk about that. So in the previous version of Webiny, we had these variables generated for you in your environment JSON file. Then along the way we discovered that it's difficult to maintain, and it's difficult to introduce changes to your app if you actually generate these values inside of your environment JSON file. So what we did is we inverted the logic, and with Webiny version like 4.3.0, I think, we have this way of working with environment variables where you control where you load them from when you run your bundling. So these variables are dynamically loaded whenever you run a build process. And that is handled by this helper function called setEnvironmentFromState. It's a descriptive name, and that helper function comes from a plugin which is actually responsible for deployment of our stacks. What it does is it takes environment you want to load. In our case, we will load a local environment, and it takes a stack name. Since Webiny is a project which allows you to have multiple stacks, you can load variables from any stack you like. So here we just say, hey, give me this stack. We'll go to how we pass a stack name into just in a second. So we tell him load this stack and load this environment and populate this environment variables map. So what we do with this is we basically say, hey, I want to have this environment variable, which comes from this state. And this is a nested path, like access cognito resource, access its user pool, and grab its region, and so on. For GraphQL API, we have access CDN resource and grab its URL, and so on. So you can define as many variables as you need, as many as your app needs, and these will be dynamically loaded from your stack and environment you requested. So the way we tell your command which environment or stack we want, we will use our parameters. We will just say, hey, I want to use an API stack, and I want to use local environment. So what will happen is that once it's executed, this will be local, this will be API. And this setEnvironmentFromState will go into your state folder, which is .webiny. It will grab API stack, local environment, and then it will load values from these state files. You don't need to use all of them. It's enough to just open this Webiny JSON, and you will see a lot of data in here. So let's say we are looking for cognito, right? There we are. So this is the state of our cognito resource. And if we look at the keys, it says cognito, then user pool, then region. So cognito dot user pool dot region will be somewhere at the bottom. Oh, come on, I picked up like the hugest resource. Yeah, the region is at the bottom. And you'll get this injected as your environment variable. So that way we can dynamically populate environment variables for our Webpack. So once this is executed, your process.env will contain all these variables, and then when you run start app, which will in turn run Webpack build, it will have these variables available. So since I had my build process running in the background, it already built and started this thing. So let me restart it, because I modified the package.json with these parameters and have a problem stopping the process. Very cool. Let's just do it manually. So apps, my app, yarn start. As you can see, the command is executed with a specific stack and environment. And now when Webpack finishes bundling, our app will be loaded. See, now bundling takes a little bit more time because we are importing our entire app template, which is quite large. So just give it a second. Building styles. This step always takes the longest. Come on. There we go. Now, as you can see, out of the blue, we have an entire Webiny administration app. It's being loaded. And I need to log in. I created the username in advance so we don't waste time on system setup. There we go. So if you look at your code, you literally have one. I'll close this. You literally have one index file which only loads a single npm package, and you have an entire app. So this is the whole idea behind React app templates. And as you can see, the whole Webiny is in here. So this is the approach we use to build these templates, and you can make them as simple or as complex as you need or your project needs. You can also compose them, meaning you can create simple templates and then add more plugins on top of them and wrap that in another template package, which just passes the necessary configuration like this or plugins, and you build a reusable apps, not reusable components, but actually reusable apps. So now that you know what benefits React apps gives us, let's go back to the barebone file, like the clean index TSX file, and build a template from scratch, so you see how it's constructed in the background. So while I'll undo all this, we'll create our own. I'll just stop the build process right now. We won't need this for a while. Just go to this screen sharing toolbar is really annoying. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So we'll have, let's create a new template and just say template directory, and we will have a simple index, TSX in there. Okay, we don't need any styles. We won't use them. Just strip this down to really only the basics. We will implement this. We won't have any styles. And since now you know how you use the template, we will just prepare our code in advance. We will just do it like that. And this is almost like writing a test. So basically, we expect this to mount our app and render it successfully. So now we need to implement our actual template code, empty file. That's all we need. So the most basic template would look like this. I'll just paste the prepared code and we'll go line by line. So to create app templates, Webiny provides this package called app template. It exposes a create template function, which is your, you could call it a factory. It's the main utility you use to construct new templates. So when you execute this create template and pass it some options, we will cover the options in a second, you will get your template factory. So this function takes care of constructing all your plugins and creating a factory for you so that when you execute it like this, you get your React component ready to be mounted. So it supports TypeScript out of the box. And that's what we want, because we want to make app templates as easy to use as possible. And TypeScript is a great way to define the options your template uses. And what we do with this right now, we are creating a template which is basically mounting a router and just rendering that. So not the most exciting template, but it's here just to get the basics going. The create template is responsible for one thing, which is taking your plugins and building this routes element. It's passed to you as the children. So the only thing you need to worry about is to mount this routes element somewhere within your router. Under the hood, this is a React router, the same React router you normally use in your React projects. We just wrapped this into our own package just to add some more functionality and allow some link preloading and stuff like that. But the functionality, the API, everything is identical to regular React router. So what we do here, as you can see, we are defining a plugin. That's because in Webiny, everything is a plugin, and templates are no exception to that. So to create a template, we define a set of plugins of type app template renderer. This is the only important thing. The plugin type has to be app template renderer, and then it will be properly processed by create template tool to generate your app template. Each app template renderer has only one function, it's render, and it takes in the children, which are the result of the previous renderer. So since this is the first plugin that we are registering, there is no previous renderer, but the create template tool will generate the routes for you, and these are your children. You just have to mount it somewhere inside the router. Now, you may ask, like, why don't you just mount the router for me? Because there is also a server-side render part of the story where you don't use the browser router, but you use actually the static router, and it works a little bit differently. So we made it easy to control which router you're mounting. We just give you the actual routes, you take care of how you mount them. So this template will be pretty simple. It will just mount the browser router, and we are done. Now these options here, these are the options that will be available for the consumer of the app template. Now, if you go back to our index, you see he's complaining that, hey, I need some arguments, and this is where those options kick in. You see, now we have our base name and we have our plugins because you define them right here. And let's define a base name. We'll just put slash. That's okay. And since we have nothing to render, actually, we are not passing any routes, let's define one single route that will be passed into the router here. And we'll call it a welcome route. And I'll just copy and paste it off my second monitor. You don't see this, for convenience. There we go. And we also need to import the route. So we'll we'll use our Webiny React router, import the route, mount it, and we will basically get the same thing we did a minute ago, where we just mounted our welcome message straight away, except now we have an actual template you can use. So let's start this, and we'll see the result. Again, I will switch the split the screen, and there we go. All of a sudden, we have our welcome. Now, I'll open up React DevTools so you can actually see the structure of this app. So, router provider. This is your browser router. That's what you mounted. And then you have our route. Our router, which this is basically React router functionality. This is what he's responsible for. Nothing of this comes from Webiny. This is just using regular React router. But then at the end, you will see, oh, we have our route welcome route, and this is what comes from a plugin. Now imagine you add another route, which is hello, and we will just mount it at a. We'll just mount it at hello, and now the app is rebuilt. Let's just go hello, and we have a hello route. So as you can see, Webiny handles routes as plugins as well. We don't mount routes manually anywhere. We really try to do everything using plugins, because then it's easy to extend existing apps. Now imagine if you had these routes in some NPM package and you had to actually import them and somehow mount them into your app. Now that wouldn't be too convenient. This way you don't really care about how it is supposed to be mounted, where it comes from. You just define a plugin of type route and you provide a route. And if the template changes, nobody cares, because it will still work. Your routes will be properly collected and they will be passed to you in your routes element, which you will just mount inside the browser router. And this is the most simple app template you can come up with. So any questions, guys, so far? You're so quiet. Is this okay? Can we move on to a little bit more complex stuff? I suppose that's a yes. Let's move on. So now let's see how you can add an Apollo provider, because static apps are cool, but we all want to pull some data from API. So to do that, we will expand our template, and we will add an Apollo provider and give it an API URL to work with. So to add an Apollo provider, we will just add a new plugin. And the plugin is, again, an app template renderer. And it has a render function. Now we need to return an Apollo provider. So it encapsulates our whole application through the reps. So now we have a little bit more rendering logic to go here. So let's look what this will do. This will first execute your. It goes, if you look at it, it goes from bottom to top when it's processing your plugins. But when you render these and look in your React DevTools, you will see that this element will be at the very top. So it's easy to think about it like, if the plugin is at the top, then when rendered, this will be the first element which will be rendered. But during rendering, we actually render it from bottom to top. So we first execute this render, we pass your routes to it, then we get the result of this plugin, then we pass the result of this plugin as children into the plugin above it. And then these children here will be the whole browser router with routes, and so on. So as many plugins as you're adding, they will just be executed from bottom to top, if you look at it from the code perspective. And once rendered, they will be actually mounted from top to bottom. And let's just finish the implementation of this, and we'll look at this in our React DevTools. So we need a Apollo provider, and we need this Apollo client. So let's add those imports. So Apollo provider is your regular Apollo provider from React Apollo library. Nothing new here. But the client we will have to create manually. So let's say it's create Apollo client. It's factory function. Okay, and I will also copy the code from my other screen. Ignore the errors on the right. They will go away once we are done. So let's take a look at this create Apollo client. So what this does, it creates the most basic Apollo client, and it configures it to use batch HTTP link, which means it will batch parallel requests. You can call it parallel. Basically, it has a small timeout, which it uses to collect as many API calls you are making, and if it finds like 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever number of API calls that are happening very close to each other on the timeline, it will group them in one and only send one HTTP request to your server. Then the server will take care of unpacking it and processing them individually, and then sending the results back. And then this link will again dispatch the results to the proper queries or mutations. So it depends on what you're doing. This is that. And as you can see here, we are using React App GraphQL API URL. This we already covered. Now we will have to add this in our Webiny config.js. We already have it in here, so we are fine with that. But for example, for our app, we don't need all this cognito stuff, so we can just go with this. So when you run your app, again, you will request an API stack and a local environment which will populate these values, inject them into Webpack, and that's how this variable here will be interpolated, and it will become an actual string with the API URL. Okay, another thing is we configure some in-memory cache. That's a regular thing you do. There's nothing to talk about here. And the only thing we like to add is this omit type name link. Now this link is something that we created at Webiny, but many projects use a similar thing. GraphQL by default adds type name to your responses. So when you query something, each type will have this type name. Sorry, if I could type it correctly. A type name data sent back to you in the results, and then it's all fine if you're not sending that data back. For example, when you're submitting your forms. When you're submitting your forms, this data will be sent back to your API, and then if you don't have it defined as an input in your mutation, then it will complain that it's an invalid query, because it is. You don't have that as an input, but you're sending it in. So what we do is whenever we fetch data from API, we just strip away that type name from the result, and we get clean data. So that's why we like to add it here. But like, I could have removed this for example purposes, but oh well. It's okay. You will work with this if you're working with Webiny, so no harm talking about it right now. All right, so we have our Apollo provider, we have our client. The browser already did the rendering, and you can now see that at the very top, we have Apollo provider. So this is basically what I mentioned before. Plugins will be mounted at the in the same order in which you define them here. So they go from top to bottom. So Apollo provider, browser router, we have our hello route here. And this is pretty much it. Now you can see how you can easily build your own templates. You can easily publish these as npm packages. Here we had it as an inline code right now, right here in the source folder, but you can just as easily extract that into a packages folder and create a proper npm package from it, and just use it the same way we did with Webiny admin full template showcased earlier. And yeah, this is pretty much it. So again, just a quick recap. Simple React app. You use a template, pass it some options, and you can add as many plugins as the template is actually supporting. So you can define routes, you can define all kinds of plugins depending on your apps. So yeah, I think this is pretty much it. And in the next session, I think we will have Adrian with us. He will talk about server-side rendering, and he will continue from where we left off at this point. So yeah, thanks for listening. I hope this was informative.
Yeah, for sure it was, Pavel. Thank you a lot for your session. And just wanted to let our audience know that we'll post the links on our description for our documentation. And of course, we have our Slack community where they can join and ask questions if they need, and join our community, of course. Thanks a lot, and we'll see each other in our next knowledge sharing session. Have a good time.
Right. Bye-bye.